Hello and welcome back to another episode of The Jake Williams Show. I, of course, am your host, Jake Williams, and today we're going to give you a special, maybe bonus, or maybe I'm just getting ahead of myself, episode of The Jake Williams Show, episode 50. Now, as per usual fashion with this show, I had planned some things out in my head where I said, episode 50, I'm going to start bringing in more people to do interviews, and it's not going to be a common occurrence with this show. It's not going to be a full interview show, but I'm going to have more guests and kind of break up the monotony and just have other than just solo episodes. Well, as typical fashion with myself and this show, I had to call an audible and make a change because I did not expect to do this. So on Thursday, October 3rd, when this first released in theaters, I saw the Joker movie. Now, if you've been paying attention to the show, last episode I talked about Joker, but that was more of, because I hadn't seen it yet, that was more about the controversies behind the movie and addressing those. And there are more controversies for this movie, as many of you probably know, and I'm going to address those as well, in a little bit, probably before I even get into the review of the movie. Because it's hard not to talk about this movie without talking about the controversies behind it. And if you saw the title, this is full spoilers. I'm going to talk about everything I can in this movie, which honestly would be impossible for me to do this episode without spoiling it. There's just too much in this movie that I tried multiple times to talk about it vaguely with people that hadn't seen it yet. And it's probably the hardest thing I've ever had to do, because there's just so much to this movie, and it's such a weird, complex movie. It's something I haven't seen in a long time. And it's definitely a movie that people are talking about, and a lot of people want to talk about, and case in point, I want to talk about. I had no intentions, to be honest, I really didn't have many intentions to see this movie when I did. A friend of mine really wanted to see it. Ashley did not want to see it, so I kind of just seized the opportunity and saw it with a friend of mine who, at some point, I hope will be on this show. So I had no intentions of doing this episode or any sort of spoiler talk about it, but that movie grabs you in a way where you want to talk about it and have a discussion, and I can't do that without spoiling the movie. I just have to do it. So we're going to get to that in a second. I do want to address some things that I saw online. Now, last episode I talked about people that are trying to protest this movie because of the intent of the movie, and people are worried that they're going to be glorifying a crazy person, and they're going to be glorifying violence from people that are mentally ill and have legitimate mental health issues that could be violent and attack people. And I totally get that assessment. I understand where people are coming from, but like I said in that last episode, the big problem with that is you haven't seen the movie yet, so you don't have a fair assessment of the movie. You don't know. Of course, I do because I've seen it, but before that, you had no idea what the intention of the movie was going to be. So how could you immediately just cast out, your anger and dispersion to a movie that you have yet to see? It just seems silly to me. And, there's multiple layers to this movie. Not just the movie itself, but the negative press and the weird controversies that came out of it, with Todd Phillips' comments, with that weird Jimmy Kimmel segment with Joaquin Phoenix, and then the, quote, air quotes, the walkout interview that Joaquin Phoenix had. There's just such a weird vibe about this movie. Now, all that press before never really changed my opinion of the movie, because personally, I don't really care about the press tours or the press junkets before movie releases, because let's be honest, they're not genuine. They're not legitimate things to follow for the movie. Unless, of course, you're listening to like a podcast where it is just the director or an actor in the movie and they're going like in-depth, like long-form podcasting, then there's something to pull from this. But if it's like the Joaquin Phoenix thing on Jimmy Kimmel, or the Vanity Fair article that everybody references about Todd Phillips, to me, there's not a lot of substance there, and I don't really care. It's not going to change my opinion of seeing the movie. And I'm also someone that can separate art from the artist. So some direct, unless of course they're a horrible, horrible human being, and that's a different story. But I'm also someone that was like, someone says something stupid in an interview, I don't really care. It doesn't affect my opinion of the movie. It's not going to affect me seeing the movie. That being said, all this pre-press, people talk about any press is good press, and I think that's true, especially with this movie. This is a movie that is tailor-made for bad press because people already have their preconceived notions of the movie. They already know what they want to get out of this movie. So anything bad coming from it or anything different or new, it's not going to affect anything. People are going to, I guarantee more people saw more of it because of all the controversies behind it. I really do, because that's just the world we live in. So let's address some of the controversies, and I'm not going to go full whole bore on this stuff. This is mostly going to be a spoiler review, but I do have to address some more controversies because it seems like once you think you've covered one of them, there's more of them. So the things that I didn't talk about in the pre-release, there was a Todd Phillip Vanity Fair story where he said that the reason he made these movies now, so the approach of doing a dramatic, weird turn for the superhero genre, Todd Phillips said it's hard to be funny now in woke culture. I'm not going to give you the direct quote. That's just what everybody pulls from it. Honestly, I think it's not. I think it's a silly quote because there are still people out there that are still funny. And yes, we have a culture that's different, but it's also like, I hate using the term woke culture, and I hate the idea that you can't do comedy because of the current social climate. That's the thing. So society changes. And that's kind of the ironic thing of this whole article is here's a guy who makes a movie about somebody that has a mental illness or multiple mental illnesses. They make that vague enough in the movie so they can kind of get away with it, I guess. Instead of committing to one thing, it's just a vague thing. Regardless, this is a guy making a movie about society, and he goes out into an article and complains about society. And he can't be funny because of society. I do find that humorous in itself. So, Todd Phillips, you're wrong. You can be funny because I thought that was funny. I understand that we are in a different climate, and I do think that we are overly PC sometimes. I think we tend to overanalyze our words, and I definitely think we are in a culture because of social media that is more prone to outrage over nothing and freaking out over tiny things. I mean, when Sticks and Stones, the Dave Chappelle special came out on Netflix, that's all people could talk about, one way or the other. Either he went too far, or it was just comedy, or this, that, the other thing. Very successful. And I thought it was very funny. And that's the thing, is humor is so subjective that you can't complain about not being funny in a woke culture. And I hate that term, woke culture, because it shouldn't be a problem for you. It should not be an issue because society, much like human beings, it's a moving target. This stuff changes constantly. Things that were commonplace in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, even early 2000s when you came to prominence, it's different. People change. Society changes. Thoughts change. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think people automatically, and that's just human nature. When there's change, it's scary and you don't like it. And I had to address that. The other thing I want to address is the people leaving the theater. I saw a report that people were leaving theaters early, leaving screenings early because of the violence in this movie. Here's the problem I have with that. I think it was just another thing used to drum up some more controversy for this movie, because I've done further research on it, and nobody can back up that claim that actually happened. It was just an internet rumor that people had walked out of the movie. And I'm not surprised by that because of all the hoopla behind this movie is completely manufactured because people are just, they're crazy about this stuff. get the joke because Joker is crazy. Moving on. People are drumming up a lot of things, and I think are creating a story there when there's not. And that seems to be a problem with not just this movie, but with just in general. But I think the movie itself there are scenes of, and we'll get to those, of violence, of very brutal violence. But it is so few and far between, I can't imagine anybody walking out. There's only one scene in particular, which, again, we'll get to, because I want to give you a fair warning before we get into the spoilers. There's one scene in particular that is very brutal and very sudden and really shocks you. And I think, obviously, that's the point of the movie. That's what they're trying to invoke in you. But aside from that, the violence in this movie is not that graphic or not that bad. It really isn't. It's not. Which also that brings me back to something, again, Todd Phillips said about John Wick in Joker, because all this controversy behind Joker and the violence in the movie and Todd Phillips, I think rightfully so, said, well, why does John Wick get a pass where John Wick kills hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people in that movie? Again, there's a difference because context is important, and John Wick is a movie where there is a ton of violence, but there's so much violence at a certain point it's cartoonish and silly. Whereas this movie, the context is much more tight-knit and in your face and brutal. So, yes, people did not walk out of this movie. As far as I know, there's no claims to this. All this extra security and all this extra stuff, again, about this movie, people need to relax. Because as I said in the last episode, most people, myself included, who saw this movie, can detach a film from reality. Most people are not going to get inspired by this movie. Because this, again, people hadn't seen the movie yet. And if you'd actually seen the movie, you'd understand that the intent is not to make you praise this individual. By the end of the movie, you feel gross, you feel sick, and that is the point of the movie. No point of that movie did I want to stand up and applaud his actions. Nobody did. Matter of fact, this is the only time I've ever seen this happen in a movie theater, when I've been to a movie. It was dead silent when that movie ended. Dead silent. There was no clapping. There was nothing. Because nobody wanted to applaud that person. Nobody wanted to applaud that approach. Because they understood that there was a horrible, horrible person in tragedy that they didn't want to applaud it and say, man, I really want to go shoot up a movie theater. Or I want to go be in the next mass shooter. People need to calm down and understand that we've had violence in this country, in this society as a whole, the whole world, for a very long time in our art. And it's you can't. I'm so sick of that argument. I am so sick and tired of people blaming art for violence. It's the most tired, lame, bullshit excuse for a movie or a video game or a book or etc. At all. Stop blaming art for people being violent and people doing horrible things, okay? I'm sick and tired of it. I'm not going to talk about this anymore because it's stupid and moronic. That being said, now, if you have not seen this movie, stop listening, go see the movie, and get out of here. I don't want you to be a part of this because this is the full Jake Williams spoiler review for Joker. I'm going to give you a countdown before you can get out of this. 3, 2, 1. All right, spoilers are on. Let's talk about Joker. Now, I tried, when I was explaining this movie just a little bit ago, even in my little rant there, this movie is gross. And this movie is unsettling. And it does not feel good to watch this movie. Which is a movie that I have a friend that wants to see it, and much similar to my situation, I don't think his significant other wants to see it, so I might see it again. And who knows what happens with that if I get more out of this movie, if I see it twice. But My initial thoughts after one viewing of this movie are that it is visceral in its nature. And I'm not talking about the violence, because honestly, the violence, other than the one scene that I was mentioning earlier, the violence is very, I don't think that horrible. I've seen much worse violence in other movies. It's extremely effective in this movie, and I think that was the intent and the purpose behind it, and I think the movie is better for it. It's almost like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, when that extremely violent scene happens, it's extremely effective in getting an emotion, getting some emotion out of you, and I feel the same way. This movie, surprisingly to me, feels a lot like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where it does feel at times a little self-indulgent. It's a slow burn, and it kind of meanders a little bit. And by the end of it, I'm thinking, unlike Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, because that ending I was kind of like, oh, that's it. But by the end of it, I was like, I just don't know how I feel about this movie. And both movies kind of have just stuck in my brain. Joker is a movie when, again, I saw it with a friend of mine, and on the drive back, we were talking about it, and we didn't know what to make of this movie. And I, even now, a few days removed, I don't know what to make of this movie. Because I felt so dirty. I felt gross. I did not know how to address the emotions that I was having. And I think, obviously, that was the intent of the movie. That's what Todd Phillips and company set out to do, I think, from the first shot of this movie. The first frame. I mean, from the jump, you are put in a lot of tension. And you just don't feel right watching this movie. And it does not stop until the credits roll. And I'm going to kind of just talk about if you guys have ever listened to my spoiler reviews, I tend to jump around a lot and just talk about things that I liked in the movie that would be spoiled for someone. So I think it goes without saying. That's a weird phrase. Goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway. Joaquin Phoenix's performance is outstanding. It is what it is hyped up to be. You know, coming into this movie, everybody was thinking Oscar performance. As people were talking about how amazing his portrayal of this character is, and they're right. I mean, everything about this movie, every single shot he is in, and he has to full bore carry this movie. It is 100% on his shoulders, and this movie does not work without his performance. And he adds a layer of depth and sympathy to his character that I was not expecting and wanting. But that being said, even the empathy I had for Arthur Fleck, it kind of goes away at points in this movie. So there are points when you feel for this guy, and I think that's effective. And then people immediately, stop the tweets, stop the comments, where people automatically have this idea that we're not supposed to sympathize with the Joker, which is not true. I hate the idea that when no sympathy for the devil. I hate that. Because I think any human being, you have to have empathy for them. That's just how human beings are wired. We're supposed to care about people. We're supposed to worry about other people to a certain degree. And this movie definitely plays with that. This movie is it's not a superhero movie. It's in the genre, but it's definitely its own thing. And it's a movie about society. It's a, cliche. It's a movie about what happens when when somebody has a problem, it goes unchecked and they're cast aside. This is what can happen. And then on the flip side of that, I think this movie, if people really pay attention, it also talks about the glorification of someone like this and how it's dangerous and it's not a good situation. So I'm going to, just work this out. It's just a thought process of this movie. I'm kind of giving you a therapy session of what I thought of this movie because I think I need therapy after seeing this. So here's some of the spoilers of this movie, and take with it what you will. I'm not going to go beat by beat everything in the movie. So the movie starts out, you find out that, Arthur Fleck, as you see in the trailer, he works as a clown, which is a part of a clown company, which I did not know. Can clowns unionize? Is that some sort of thing that I'm not aware of? I find that strange. But he works for this company, and, he's spinning a sign, kids attack him, beat him up, break the sign. You've seen that in the trailer, that's in the movie. And that kind of sets a tone. Immediately sets a tone for this movie. And I think a lot of this movie is very deliberate with its pacing, with its symbolism, with everything. This movie is very deliberate. And I think they're immediately trying to establish what to expect with this movie, because later on we find out that he works at this company. He's sitting there in his locker. His coworker comes up to him and he goes, "I heard what happened. You got jumped. It's a sick world we live in. Here, you need to protect yourself." And he gives him a bag with a gun in it and bullets. And, Arthur, I'm not going to call him Joker yet. Arthur goes, "I can't have a gun. I can't do that, blah, blah, blah." And he's like, "No, just think of it as a favor, and you can pay me back kind of thing. Don't worry about it." So Arthur takes the gun. And in that, later in that scene, which, again, that scene starts with, and this is just, again, the deliberate pacing of this movie. The weight loss and the physique and the look of Arthur Fleck, I think, is important to this movie, because I think it plays to the character. It really does work in a way, which initially I thought, oh, they're doing some weird artistic choice. But coming out of it, I understand it, because he's not physically imposing, but yet he's capable of horrific acts of violence, much like the character of the Joker. And that's also another thing. I said I wouldn't talk about this, but I want to come back. I want to circle back to what I was talking about earlier. Why is it that when we finally have a movie focusing on this guy, now all of a sudden we're outraged by this character, but we were totally fine with him in any other form of Batman media? Is it because Batman was there to put him in check? Because you were totally fine when he was murdering people and, quote, air quotes, putting people with laughing gas on a kid's show where he's murdering there, he's murdering in video games, he's murdering in movies. I mean, Heath Ledger's Joker has immediate acts of violence when you see him. He murders his henchmen. Or when you actually finally get the full-on Heath Ledger performance, he smashes a dude's face through a pencil. So stop pretending you care about the violence of the Joker now. Back to the movie. He finds out, and later in that scene, I think it establishes something. I chuckled at this because they had a joke, everybody laughs, and he kind of laughs and then walks in the hallway. It's the shot that you saw in the trailer, and then he just stops. And I kind of chuckled at that. But then I thought, wait a minute, that makes so much sense. He's putting up a facade. He doesn't know how to be a normal human. And that is one of the themes of the movie. And he writes it in his notebook, and it's very plain to see, and it's very deliberate in what they're doing. He writes a joke where he laughs about it. He writes a joke, and he says, the problem with mental illness is people expect you to act like you don't have one. Something like that. I'm paraphrasing. Immediately sets that, too. It's very deliberate in what it's trying to say. And he's immediately telegraphing to you, I don't know how a normal reaction is, or at least what we've made in our society. I don't know how to explain that or do that, and I'm doing my best to convey it. And I think people need to just strip it to its base form. Strip away the fact that it's a DC movie. Strip away the fact that it's in Gotham, and it has to do with the Joker, and then there's the Wayne family, and all this stuff where this guy wears clown makeup. Strip it down to its most base story. This is a man who, which you find out later in the movie, was abandoned. Then his adopted family, which happens, this story happens a lot, by the way. He was adopted by a family whose mom was not mentally stable either, and let him be abused and beaten, and was tied to a radiator. And then later in life, he continues to get beaten down by people and pills shoved down his throat, and then eventually any help that he gets defunded. And every time there's an opportunity to help him, people treat him like garbage. I think people are uncomfortable by this movie because how realistic this movie is. And I think the more I think about this movie, the more I like it. Now, are there problems with this movie? Absolutely. I don't think any movie's perfect. But when you strip it down to just that, yes, I can understand how people can understand with that sympathy. But at the same time, you're thinking, this is not what you do. Because it still says to it still tells you, the audience, this is still not acceptable. This is still not okay. We cannot justify his actions. Because if we justify his actions, then it's a vicious cycle. It's never going to end. You have to break that cycle. Because if you start justifying his violence, then you justify more violence. And the more we justify violence, we're going to kill each other. That's what this movie's trying to convey. And that's why people are lashing out about it and freaking out about it. Because they hate when something challenges them. They hate when art can challenge their actual lives. That's what this movie's trying to get at you. And you're seeing it more and more in this movie. So he gets in trouble with his job, but he still has the gun. And he lives at home. He helps his mom. He sees the late night show. That's his favorite thing. He wants to be a stand-up comedian. He just wants to be accepted. And that's something relatable. And again, I can understand where people are upset by that. But you also have to understand, to get the full gravity of the moment and the full extent of the horror that happens by the end of this movie, you have to level with the guy. You have to believe that you can see yourself in him. Because otherwise, the story's not effective. Then you're just, why should I care about this guy? This guy's crazy. He murders people. He wears clown makeup. He's a freak. Why should I care about him? You have to have at least the basis of empathy. And you have to see the line of thinking where he goes wrong. Just to establish that we are human beings and we need to treat each other better so we don't create monsters. That's essentially what this is. We should listen to the people that have mental illness. We should help the people that have mental illness. We have to train them to keep those violent urges or those horrible urges in check. Because if we don't, they shoot people, lots of people. We also, I listened to last podcast on the left, and Marcus Parks, one of the best phrases. It's not your fault for your mental illness, but it's your responsibility. And we have to eliminate a stigma for mental illness. We really do. I don't think we have a gun problem. I think we have a mental illness problem. And that is what this movie is trying to say. Some other stuff about this movie. This actually turned into be like a thesis about the Joker, which I did not intend. I actually intended to talk about the spoilers of this movie. So, he gets in trouble with that. Later on in the movie, he's performing in a hospital, and the gun falls out of his pants, and he scrambles to pick it up. And, of course, his employer finds out, he loses his job. And this is what sets in motion really the change in the Joker. And I think this is I would say probably the beginning of the second act of this movie. And so he loses his job. Before that, he is told that they're cutting the funding to his, state therapy. And his therapist tells him straight up that nobody gives a shit about you, nobody gives a shit about me. And sadly, that is the truth in some cases. Most cases, very unfortunately. And he gets on the subway, and there's these 3 jerk bankers that are harassing this woman. And he has a condition in this movie that he has uncontrollable laughter. It's like a Tourette's kind of thing. And so they go from harassing her to him because he keeps laughing and he can't help himself. And then the usual thing that happens, they knock him down. They start beating him up. Very similar to the first shot of the movie with the kids. And then because he has the gun, and I guess it's loaded, he pulls it out and shoots those men. Shoots 2 of them. One of them he shoots in the leg, and then he kind of chases in the subway and kills them. And that is kind of where people kind of break from the movie and go, I don't think I like this. And I think it's multiple things. I think one of them is, oh man, this movie just justified this because honestly, I would do this. Right? And you kind of level with them because these dudes are horrible people. Did they deserve to die? No. And that's kind of the point. Or you have to kind of see a good villain has to have you be able to see where they're coming from and kind of understand their line of thinking. But at the same time, you have to think to yourself, that's still not okay. Those men didn't deserve to die in that subway. Should he have defended himself? Absolutely. But those men didn't deserve to die. And that's kind of the problem, where people are kind of like, they want to justify that violence. But then you also have to like keep your brain in check. Like, no. That's not okay. And that's kind of the fun of this movie. And much like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the more I talk about it, the more I'm starting to like this movie. The more I'm talking to you guys on this podcast, the more I'm starting to like it. So that happens. And then this is where the movie this is one of my problems with the movie. It does, like I mentioned earlier, it starts to feel a little self-indulgent with some of the things it does. After he kills them, he starts to like do this he runs for a while and then gets into a bathroom and does this dance. I understand the intent behind the scene because this is the first time he's felt power in his life. And this, again, is where the movie starts to it kind of has the justification and the violence, but then this is where you start to think, whoa, that's not the proper reaction. He's a little bit nervous, he's a little bit scared, but then he starts to dance. And he starts to feel empowered, and he starts to feel good about himself. You should not have that reaction after murdering 3 people in a subway. Nobody should dance after that. Normally, you would freak out and you'd try to think, oh my God, I killed 3 people. What do I do? How did this happen? What do I do? I got to tell somebody. I have to tell the police. No, he just dances. And then he goes home. Not okay. I don't care what's happened to him. Again, he should have defended himself. But all this stuff that's happened to him, it still doesn't justify killing someone. And that's the beauty of what they're trying to tell with this story. And if people can't get on board with that and can't understand that, fine. If you don't like it, I totally understand it. This movie is not for everyone. I told you, when I got out of this movie, initially, I didn't know what to make of it. I didn't know if I should like it. And if you don't like it because of that sequence, that's okay. That's another thing people tend to forget in 2019. Our tribalistic, divisive nature. You don't have to like everything that other people like. It's okay. And you're not a hipster if you don't like something that everybody else likes. And then earlier he met the neighbor in his apartment complex. And he like goes and they chatted with each other. And then he kind of follows her at one point in the movie. And she's kind of okay with it. Weirdly. All the stuff that happens with the girl I thought was a brilliant twist, because what this movie does well, I think, is this. Initially, I had the common Batman fan reaction where I hate that they're making a Joker origin story because Joker shouldn't have an origin. This, that, and the other thing. I still agree with that sentiment, but this movie does something creative where there's a whole subplot that he has with this girl that Yazzie Beats, a.k.a. Domino, that's kind of it's the weakest part of the movie, if I'm being honest. It's just underdeveloped. And after actually seeing, watching the movie, I think that was intentional with what they were doing, that aspect of it, of that it's not real. Because there's at one point he does the stand-up he comes in and makes out with her. We don't know. Maybe they have sex. I think that's the implication. They go on a date where he does open mic stand-up comedy. You've seen that in the trailer where they eventually find it, whatever. We'll get to that. There's a relationship that I don't believe because he still has his mental weirdness and creepiness to him, but she's okay with it. I guess there could be people out there, but it just seemed out of place in this movie. And then you find out later in the movie, he goes into her apartment and he's sitting on the couch, and she walks out of the room and she freaks out and she goes, I think you're in the wrong apartment. You live in this building, right? Your name's Arthur. So then you find out, oh, this was all in his head. This isn't real. And that's what I like about this movie, because then it kind of sets you down a path where you're like, maybe this is all made up. Maybe this isn't the actual origin story of the Joker. Maybe this is just in the mind of Arthur Fleck. All of this stuff. Because after he shoots those guys in the subway, there's this whole movement because the people saw him running. They said, oh, he was dressed as a clown. So there's this whole movement of, kill the rich. They don't care about us, because Thomas Wayne in this story is running for mayor of Gotham. At one point, he called the citizens clowns, so now they all dress up as clowns, and he kind of inadvertently started a movement. Again, could be in his brain. Because obviously that's what the Joker would want. And the more I thought about that theory, I was like, oh, okay, so yeah, it might not be real. I saw a joke on Screen Rant when they did the pitch meeting on YouTube. They made a joke that it's a Fight Club flashback where it's the whole Tyler Durden thing. I like it, though. I think it works effectively for this movie because it does play with... And my buddy who I watched it with, he said that it plays with the idea of the Joker saying, if I have a pass, I prefer it to be multiple choice. This whole entire movie kind of plays with that idea. Another storyline that's in this movie, his mom, who he's really close with, who they have a relationship. It's the kind of relationship where it's like maybe she needs a caretaker, but she doesn't want to get a caretaker. She wants him to be her caretaker, which is... Whenever that story is involved, that he's getting used and that it's not a good relationship. And then we find out that she's sending letters to Thomas Wayne. Apparently she used to work for Thomas Wayne, but she keeps sending him letters. She's like, have I got anything back? And, at certain points he's like, why do you care? He's a very busy man. He's a rich man. Why do you keep sending him these things? She's like, well, it's important. We were close, blah, 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 this, that, and the other thing. And then we find out, because he actually kind of opens up, because she hadn't delivered the letter yet. He opens it up. And then we get this whole storyline, which, again, this is one of the twists in the movie where I thought, okay, we're going there. We're doing this. And he reads it, and it's trying to say that he is the illegitimate bastard son of Thomas Wayne. Which I'm okay with, because it's kind of different. It's kind of new. It's kind of weird. So you're trying to tell me that the Joker in this movie is half-brothers with Bruce Wayne. The Joker is half-brothers with Batman. Honestly, I kind of dug it. I kind of like that storyline. But we, again, in the movie, playing with your expectations, playing with what's real and what's not, he tries to investigate this. So he eventually ends up going and finding Thomas Wayne and running into him. Before that, it's a super creepy and weird scene where he goes to Wayne Manor, sees kid Bruce, like 10-year-old Bruce, pre-Batman Bruce, as most people would say. He sees him, he shows up, and he does his usual clown shtick magic trick, and then he takes his fingers and puts them in Bruce's mouth and makes the smiley face, which that's so weird and so creepy because it's almost like what he did, with the first shot of the movie is him crying in the mirror making this smiley face. Excuse me. Which, that's a really creepy way to visit your long-lost half-brother. I'm just imagining that weird scenario where you're like, oh, man, hey, guess what? We're brothers. We never met before. Let me put my fingers in your mouth and smile. Then Alfred shows up, and he's like, hey, get the hell out of here. I think his name was Penny in this movie. I'm Penny Fleck's son, and he's like, oh yeah, the crazy lady who keeps sending us messages, get out, or sending us letters, get out of here, you freak, blah blah blah. And then you see again the crack of him becoming Joker. He like he's strangling through the gated fence. He's like reaching through and strangling Alfred, and eventually he lets go because he sees Bruce's terrified look on his face. So then he leaves. Which again, is this in his mind? Because I feel like if that were to happen, the police would be finding him and breaking down his door because it's Bruce Wayne. It's the Wayne family. Thomas Wayne wouldn't definitely fucking press charges. But I digress. So that I think that's a big point. Eventually, Arthur does find Thomas Wayne. Talks to him in the bathroom, which, again, if you're going to drop any kind of life-altering, life-changing news, I feel like a bathroom isn't the best place. But, again, we're dealing with someone who doesn't have reasonable line of thinking, right? So he's like, hey, I'm your son. And he's like, I'm Penny Fleck's kid. He's like, oh, great, the crazy lady who keeps sending me letters and blah, blah, blah. I'm his son. And he continues to tell him that, like, hey, she's crazy. Your mom isn't what you think, you know? I had to fire her because she's, like, legit, like, she's clinically insane. I had to fire her because of that. Of course, he doesn't buy it. He starts his usual uncontrollable laughter. He's like, oh, is this funny? And you saw that shot in the trailer. He punches him in the face. And interest in that, again, was a nice little character moment because then you see it again. He's starting to get more bold. He's starting to get angrier, and he's starting to have more of a, why do you people treat me like this? I'm just trying to talk to you, and this, that, and the other thing, where you kind of level with him a little bit. But then you also remind yourself that at this point in the movie, he's killed 3 men in a subway. He has showed up and kind of physically assaulted a kid. Well, harass, I guess, not assault. Harass is the word I was looking for, not assault. Assault, because he didn't punch him. He harassed him. And I guess, I don't know how you would define that. I'm just going to say harassment for the sake of the review because I really don't know the technical legal terms behind that. But he's done that. He's broken into an event that I don't think was for the public. I think it was like for the rich elite people, but he definitely broke into something that he was not supposed to be in. And so again, you understand what he's saying there, but then you're also like, wait a minute, this guy has still done some really weird, questionable stuff before getting to this moment. So you had to peel it back a little bit, and you're like, whoa. He's still not doing the right things. He's still not a hero in this story. And that's what people forget and don't understand. This is a unique story because it's not a hero. This is a story of a man's descent into madness. It's not the story of a man overcoming his madness and overcoming the environment he's in. This is a man that's ruined by it. So after that, he goes to Arkham, which, hey, Arkham State Hospital. Not Arkham Asylum, but, Arkham nonetheless. He goes there, gets the files, because in the dialogue, Thomas Wayne said, we checked her in Arkham and blah, blah, blah. He goes there, gets the files about his mom, and this is what we find out when I mentioned earlier, that he was abused by her boyfriend and treated horribly. At this point, she has had a stroke because they had a fight about him finding out he was the illegitimate son of Thomas Wayne. So she's in the hospital, and he shows up in the hospital, and this is, I would say, the start of Act 3. This is where he is full on, I am going to be the Joker now, because he previously in the hospital, they aired his open mic thing on Robert De Niro's late night talk show, and he was devastated by it. So he gets a call at some point in the movie. Again, I told you I'd be jumping around. This is not a through line of the movie. I'm just kind of jumping around. They invite him on the show somehow. Somehow they get his contact information, and he's on the show. Which I like that they the time period they chose because it's very ambiguous. I think it's like late 70s, early 80s in that time period. So all this stuff, he finds out that she let him be abused. She's not really his mom. He's an abandoned child. He's a nobody. And this is where we have the classic moment. And this is where he completely decides to be the Joker. He goes to his mom's hospital bed. He said that, you remember you told me that my laughing was a condition. And the whole time this movie, he references, when I was a kid, my mom told me to put on a happy face and make the world laugh and smile and blah, blah, blah. And this is where he shows up to the hospital and decides, hey, I'm going to kill this woman, pretty much. Also, I think it's important to point out that the cops are onto him because he was dressed like a clown, and his former employer did mention that he was fired because he had a firearm, and there's that whole storyline. I'm just referencing that for later. And then he says, this is where he says the line from the trailer. He says, I used to think my life was a tragedy. It's a comedy. And he takes a pillow and suffocates his mom and kills her in her hospital bed. Which, again, is it real? Because at that point, she would be flatlining, and nurses and doctors would be running it. So this is where I'm starting to, as the more I analyze this movie, the more I'm kind of thinking about it. And it's kind of clever, because this is how you could work in your own plot holes. If you ever want to write a movie that might have plot holes in it, just play with the idea that it might be made up. Like it might be imaginary, because you can get away with it, like this movie does. Because there are convenient plot holes in this movie. Again, I didn't say it was perfect. So then he, suffocates her. And that's curtains on Pennyfleck. And he goes home to get ready for the Robert De Niro show. He taped the previous night, and he keeps running it back and rewinding it. So he's kind of choreographing how he would come into the show. And he's like, hey, Moria, here's a joke. Bang. Knock, knock. And then he pulls out the gun and mimics that he's going to kill himself. So I think that, at this point, he's like, I have nothing to lose. I just killed my mom. I'm not Thomas Wayne's son. I'm the person that I thought I was in love with isn't in love with me. That's also, by the way, after he kills his mom, or after he finds out about his mom abandoning him. That's when he goes to Yazzie Beats' apartment and that whole thing. And then after that, he kills his mom. Again, I'm sorry, I'm jumping around. Again, if you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. If you're this far in and you haven't seen the movie and you feel like I'm ruining it for you, that's your fault. So, again, this whole review, I did not expect to be rambling for an hour. But here I am. And I thought that was really interesting. And, so at this point I'm thinking, he has nothing to lose. He's gonna kill everybody in that room and then kill himself kind of thing. And it's going to be bad, and it's going to be horrible. And it's like, gross. So as he's, he does that, and then you see the shot that you saw in the trailer where he's putting on he's dyeing his hair, he's putting on the makeup, he's embracing that he is the Joker. Then his coworkers show up, the guy that gave him the gun, and the, for lack of a better, they just call him midget. So I guess the midget, that's probably not PC, but little person, and the guy that gave him a gun, they show up and they're like, "Hey man, so what's going on?" He's like, "Oh, nothing. My mom's dead." "Well, why are you in makeup?" "Oh, I'm just kind of celebrating." And this is the scene I was talking about at the beginning of the show, where we have a moment of extreme violence that kind of takes you back. And it's an effective use of it, because the gunshots in this movie, the sound design is incredible. The gunshots are loud and shocking and jarring. The violence in this scene where when he answers the door, he puts scissors in his pocket. He doesn't know who's on the other side of that door. He just knows whoever comes in this apartment is going to get killed. He makes that decision right away. So, his friend that gave him the gun comes in. He says, "Hey, what's it going? Yeah, maybe you should give me the gun back. So much heat going out." Yeah, stabs him in the throat, stabs him in the head, and then smashes his head into the wall multiple times. And again, it's loud. It's jarring because of the sound design of this movie. Anytime the Joker has any moment of violence, it is ruthless and jarring and visceral, and that's why people are upset. And again, that's the point of the movie. When you see this happen, you're not supposed to applaud it. You're not supposed to cheer it. You're supposed to be disgusted by it. if you felt dirty and gross and weird and after this movie, that's what they were trying to do. It's supposed to challenge you emotionally, and it works. And again, as I'm saying this, much like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the more I talk about it, the more I start to like it, and the more I dig it. So the moment of violence happens, and then this is where they actually have some humor, some really dark, sadistic humor that it really works, and it's the Joker. So the little guy, he's like, oh shit, I'm dead, I'm out of here, and he starts to leave, and as he's leaving, Joker jumps at him, which is funny. It works because he's like, and it's a moment of like so out of left field. Because there's not any laughs in this movie. So when there's a little bit of comedy, I thought it was an excellent use of just to add some levity to the situation. So he scares him, and he's like, hey, you can go, kind of thing. And the little guy can't reach the lock, can't reach the latch, which is kind of funny. Again, I'm sorry, little man. It's kind of funny, and then he actually goes up, and in my mind, I'm like, is he actually gonna kill this guy again? Like, is he really gonna kill this guy? And again, they're playing with their expectations, and then he says, hey, you were always nice to me. Kisses him on the head, and sends him on his way. So now we're at the Robert De Niro scene. But before that, we have this weird slow-mo dancing scene. You're gonna see Joaquin Phoenix dance in this movie a lot. At least 4 scenes come to mind where he's dancing. But then, apparently, this is actually a good laugh because apparently the cops are watching it the whole time. And at this point, he's full-on Joker makeup. He's got the suit. He's got the makeup. There's slow-mo shots of him walking because, it looks edgy and cool. And he's doing a dance on the stairs that you saw in the trailers, and the cops see him, and they're like, hey. Because at this point, they're like, well, this guy had to have killed those guys in the subway because his mom's dead, and I feel like suffocation was her form of death, so he did this. They run into a subway. The subway is filled with people going to a protest that have the clown masks on, so they look like him, and it's the shot that you saw, like the behind-the-scenes footage. They try to attack him, and then that starts a riot because one guy tries to stop him because one of the cops pulls out his gun, and then the fire goes off, and one of the guys gets shot, so there's a big skirmish and attack, and he manages to get away scot-free, which, again, maybe it is in his head. Goes to Robert De Niro, and this is really towards the end of the movie. I'm trying to wrap it up here. He goes to Robert De Niro's show, and he's wearing the makeup, and it's the scene from the trailer, which I saw some people online saying they kind of wish they would have took out of the trailer, and I could kind of see that because it's kind of a big moment. His mirror says, put on a happy face. Mark Maron cameo shows up with Robert De Niro, and they're like, all right, we're going to go on, and what's the deal with the makeup? And it's not a political thing. It's just a joke because, this, that, or the other thing. They're like, oh, yeah, one more thing. Can you introduce me as Joker? And you're like, why Joker? That's not your name. And he's like, well, you said in your video, when you showed that video to me, you called me a Joker, and I want to be called the Joker, blah, blah, blah. Robert De Niro's like, all right, I'm cool. Which anybody else in this scenario would be like, first of all, you're wearing clown makeup, and he should have listened to Mark Maron, honestly, because Mark Maron's just like, I don't really know his character. I think it's Gene. Who cares? He was just like, hey, people are not going to go for that. That's crazy. It's not a political thing. Oh, see, it's not a political thing. I understand that Robert De Niro's character, he wants ratings. I get that. But, dude, look at the situation you're in. Don't trust that guy in makeup, okay? So we go out, we have the scene, and, he does this little dance thing, and he sachets out. And this is where, Joaquin's kind of hamming it up a little bit. And now he's, Joker. He's playing the Joker character. And this is where you really see him embrace the character, and he's finally Joker. And it's not a happy moment. It's not. It's not a good moment in the movie because you're sitting there and it feels like you're sitting on pins and needles because this man's unhinged and you're not rooting for him. You don't want him to do the horrible, dastardly things he's about to do. Dastardly, nobody says that but me because it's a comic book movie. Well, man, we're approaching an hour and I did not expect to be talking about this movie this long. But he does something that I just they have the dialogue. They go back and forth. He does the usual Joker stuff. He pulls out his notebook that he's had throughout the movie that has these scribblings and these like pictures of mutilated bodies, and his joke book, but also his thoughts journal, which is, again, in and of itself kind of silly and seems like it would make sense that Joker would do that. So he takes that out and he's like, oh, I got a few jokes. And he takes a little bit and he says, knock, knock. You know, Robert De Niro makes the joke like, oh, it took you that long to think of that? And he's like, well, I wanted to get it right. And he's like, knock, knock. Who's there? Oh, it's the police. Your son died in a DUI. He's dead. And nobody laughs. And he's like, well, that's not funny. And he's like, well, comedy is subjective. And they have a little back and forth. He admits to killing the people in the subway. And then he kind of has like a mini monologue where he's like, you know what? Everybody seems to care about them. But if that were me dead on the sidewalk, you people would just walk right over me. You don't care. I mean, he's got a point. And, you know, they have a little rat-tat-tat. And then eventually he goes, hey, I got another joke. And he's like, no, I think we're done here. And he goes, what do you get when you take a mentally ill loner and you give him a society that doesn't care about him? And he goes, you get what you fucking deserve. And he shoots Robert De Niro in the head. Everybody freaks out. And then he kind of like dances a little bit. And he walks up to the camera and pulls it in like he's going to start talking, and then he gets arrested, and then he gets put in the cop car, and he's sitting in the back looking out. I was like, I thought that was like an homage to The Dark Knight. And this is where I thought the movie was going to end, because the officer sitting there, because he's kind of giggling in the back seat. He's like, what are you laughing about? This whole city's on fire because of you. And he goes, I know. Isn't it beautiful? And he smiles, and he's looking at the camera. I thought it was going to cut to black. And I thought that would have been a really cool ending, really hardcore. Granted, people would have been like, oh my God, this is so blah, blah, blah. So then they get hit by a bunch of clowns driving an ambulance. And this is my biggest problem with the movie. And I out loud went, oh, you got to be kidding. So while all this stuff was happening, of course, we see a marquee that says Mask of Zorro. And if you're a Batman fan, or if you watched any Batman movie ever, it seems like, you know what's going to happen next. And it's like, it's just like Warner Brothers and DC can't help themselves. If there's any sort of affiliation with Batman, they're like, we got to kill the Waynes, man. People want to see those two get murdered. We got to shoot them. So, of course, they go down an alley, and then a guy in a clown mask goes, hey, Thomas Wayne, you get what you fucking deserve. Same exact line that Joker gives. Pop caps him. Pop caps Martha Wayne, and of course rips off her pearls, because we have to have that scene. And that happens. And then while that's happening, they take Joker out of the car, they put him on the hood, and then eventually he comes to, wakes up, sees all the chaos that he's created, and his makeup's all ruined. And this scene is probably the money shot of the movie. This would be the scene where people would lose their minds over him and say, oh, we're glorifying a murderer. Where he takes he's bleeding out of his mouth, and his makeup's all ruined. He takes the blood out of his mouth and makes a smiley face with his blood. And everybody applauds, and it's like, the Joker. And then we cut to him being interviewed at Arkham. And, I think it's the same therapist from earlier in the movie. And she's just like, he starts laughing again. And she says, well, what are you laughing about? And it cuts to Bruce Wayne standing over his parents' dead bodies. And he goes, you wouldn't get it. Or she's like, what are you laughing about? He's like, I just thought of a joke. And she goes, well, what is it? And he's having the visions of Bruce. And he goes, you wouldn't get it. And then we cut to him leaving in the hallway, and there's like bloody footsteps and him running around, running from orderlies and everything. And that's the movie. That's what I think it's kind of a dream, and it's all nonsense because of the way that he leaves and there's blood everywhere, and the fact that he's laughing about Bruce Wayne being dead. Does he know that he's Thomas Wayne's, or does he still under the assumption that he's Thomas Wayne's illegitimate son, and he's laughing at his half-brother? This whole thing is, personally, I think the whole thing with the Waynes getting killed, my buddy who I saw with him and I agreed, like tying it so much to the Waynes, I feel like it was kind of underdeveloped and half-baked because they feel like they had to, in my mind, they had to connect it back to the DC universe, and they had to connect it to the Waynes, because most of this movie could stand alone as by itself and not be tied to Gotham or the Waynes or anything. It works that way, but I feel like that whole thing was put in to justify putting the DC logo in front of the movie. And so you have your movie. Honestly, the more I've talked during this podcast and done the whole spoiler thing, I've come around to it. And that's the kind of movie it is. It's a movie that you have to really sit down and think and process everything that you've seen, because initially you're probably not going to like it. Some people probably latch on and love it right away. But I'm someone that didn't really like it, but it took me to think about it more. I don't know. I'll probably see it again, but I mean, after a second viewing, I don't know if I'll ever need to watch it again. It's not something that makes me happy. It's not something that I want to buy on Blu-ray because I want to just keep watching and watching. I say that as I probably buy it on Blu-ray because that's just the kind of person I am. Needless to say, I think the more I've thought about it, the more I've enjoyed it, and it's almost identical to my response to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And yeah, it's a movie that will challenge you. And it's a movie that I think I'm not upset that I saw. I think it's a movie that people should see. But you have to be in the right frame of mind to see it, and it's not for everybody. If you don't like to see movies where you feel gross or you feel unsettled and you don't really... You don't want to watch a movie where there's tons of constant tension and sometimes, honestly, cringy. Which it's intentional cringiness. It's not cringiness because they're trying to be funny or something. If you don't want to see that, then this is not the movie to see. You can skip it. It's very possible. You don't have to see this movie. But if that's something on your alley, you probably will, which a lot of people have. I think it's $98.5 million this weekend as I'm recording this on a Sunday. So, yeah, this crushed box office records for October. I had to double check here. It's actually 93.5, not 98. But still, amazing. Beats Venom's record that was set last year. And this is an R-rated movie, so I think that's even more impressive. And I'm glad that they convinced Warner Brothers to let them make this an R-rated movie, because I don't think it works as a PG-13 movie. Could it? Probably, but that one scene in particular where he brutally murders that guy, I don't know if that plays as effectively if it's cut away. Maybe if you zoom in on the little guy watching it, but I just don't think it works as well. So those are my thoughts on Joker. I really hope you've seen the movie. Otherwise, I spoiled the whole thing for you, or you don't care about spoilers, whatever it may be. Did you see Joker? Did you fall in love with it like most people have? Do you think it's the masterpiece? I don't know if... I hate throwing around masterpiece. I hate throwing around perfect movie. There's only one perfect movie, and that's Avengers Endgame, according to me. Do you want to see more of this from DC? Because I do. I would love to see what they do with comics, where it's like a Vertigo or a Black Label type thing, where filmmakers are allowed to make like one-off movies of what they interpret the Joker to be, or Batman or Superman or whatever the case may be. I think that would be really cool. I would dig that. Let me know what you thought of the Joker. I'm sure many you already have on social media, but I want to know in the comments on YouTube. And yeah, thanks so much for listening to another episode of the Jake Williams Show, a surprise kind of bonus episode for Joker. I had to talk about it. It was a movie that everybody's talking about, and I feel like I had to talk about it too. So, yeah, thank you so much. And check out the other shows on Loud and Opinionated. You know, Batcast, Super Cynical Cinema, Loud Sports, all that stuff. Check out the YouTube, because I do a lot of work with College Football Hangover on there. And I'm also kind of working out some ideas for Loud and Opinionated YouTube channel. And, yeah, I'm very happy to have done this episode. Maybe down the line I'll do more of these, and I am committed to getting more guests on the show. So I'll leave you with this. Whether you love the Joker or you hated the Joker, the most important thing you can do is be loud and be proud.